Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Language Arts Gallery. Today we're going to continue with academic writing and research, and we're going to talk about lesson 8. We're going to cover thesis statements today. So we're going to talk about what makes a strong research-based thesis. We're going to differentiate between working thesis statements, which we talked about in our last lesson, and more polished thesis statements that are ready for publication. We're going to look at examples in academic writing and we're going to analyze them, specifically focusing on the scope and the direction in the writing. You'll have the opportunity to develop and refine your own thesis statement, and then we'll get some practice with pronoun agreement in academic writing. So I want you to think, when you're reading a research article, I'm sure you're reading extensively on your topic right now. What helps you to trust a writer, and also what helps you to know that that writer has a very clear direction, right? When we're looking at a paper, we're going to look at the abstract or the introduction, and we want to know what that paper is about. So what helps you to know? One of the things that makes me comfortable that this writer has a clear direction, I'm well aware of where they're going, is when I see language that tells me what the study is going to do. This research, this study, this paper, this article, it investigates, it analyzes, it describes. So that gives me some indication, okay, I know where this writer is going. And there are other things too. If a writer has a strong background in that topic, then yeah, that establishes credibility as well. So we're going to talk about what a thesis statement is. So it presents the purpose of your research. It appears at or near the end of your introduction. And as I said, it gives your paper some direction. Where are you going with this research? So pause the video and think for a moment about what are the characteristics of a good thesis statement. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. A good thesis statement should be research-based. You're not talking about your opinion here, right? You're neutral and you're objective. It's going to be specific. We don't want to be too broad, and we're going to look at some very broad thesis statements. We want to establish scope and direction. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment. We want a thesis that can be explored, it can be tested. You can gather data to answer whatever research questions are associated with that thesis. And we're going to be talking more about research questions in our next video. It should be grounded in the literature. It should be grounded in prior research. So now let's talk about scope and direction. The scope is what's included in your research. And more importantly, it also speaks to exclusionary criteria. So it's like what's in and what's out. What are you writing about and what are you not writing about as well? Because that's important too. And the direction is what path your research is going to take. And we're going to talk more about both of these things. So you want to think about the aspects of the topic you're going to explore, the methods, the population, and the framework. What are the limitations and the boundaries for your research? And what direction are you taking? Is it description? And we're going to talk more about this in a moment. Description is probably not something that you're going to be doing on its own. If you're doing a doctoral dissertation, you're probably going to, if you describe something, you're going to also analyze it. It might be comparison, analysis, correlation, causal study. And what is it you're trying to understand, right? So let's take a look at these in a bit more detail. So what aspects of the topic am I going to explore? Okay, so you might be talking about, I am going to explore, for example, academic writing. That would be a very broad topic. You're going to narrow that, and perhaps you're going to explore peer review strategies among multilingual undergraduate students at large universities in the southern United States. So you're also going to talk about the methods. right? Are you going to use interviews? Are you going to use textual analysis? Who's the population? So in the example I gave previously, it would be undergraduate students, multilingual undergraduate students at large research universities in the Southern United States. And what's the framework? Is it a mixed method study? Is it purely qualitative? What limitations or boundaries are you setting? When I did my doctoral study, I was interested in expatriate teachers who were teaching or had taught in South Korea. I was not interested in people who were teaching in South Korea virtually from another country. Those people were excluded. So that's important. It's not just what's in, but also what's out. What direction is my research going to take? Okay. And we talked about that. Are you doing a causal comparative study? Are you doing a correlational study? Uh, and what's the purpose? Why is this research important? So let's look at an example here. This study examines the process of academic writing. Far too broad, right? This is not a good thesis statement. Here, we've got a much more complete, more polished thesis. This study explores the role of self-efficacy in academic writing among graduate students by analyzing qualitative data collected from interviews conducted across the humanities, sciences, and social sciences. Wow, really, really specific there. And then the author says, findings aim to contribute to writing pedagogy by identifying cross-disciplinary patterns in students' writing beliefs and behaviors. So I know why the study is important. So that's really excellent. There's a clear scope and direction. So let's look at how this second thesis statement addresses the issues of scope and direction. So first, let's talk about scope. The role of self-efficacy in academic writing among graduate students. Okay, I see that right there. What's being studied? Self-efficacy strategies. Who is being studied? Undergraduate students. What's the context? Are we talking about oral presentations? Are we talking about classroom discussions? Are we talking about reading articles? No, we're talking about academic writing. And what are the boundaries? Well, we're talking about these three disciplines, and they're broad disciplines. I graduated from the College of Social Sciences in my undergrad, and that was a huge college. There were tons of majors in that college. Same with humanities and sciences, right? This is broad, but we're limiting it to those three disciplines. Okay, so again, it's what's in and what's out. Okay, it's not about grad students. It's not about self-efficacy and oral presentations. It's just academic writing at the undergraduate level. All right, so take a moment and think about your own research. What are you studying? Who are you studying? What's the context? And what are the boundaries in your study? So now let's talk about direction. How is this study going to be done? And I've got some key phrases here. By analyzing qualitative data collected from interviews. Qualitative interviews, right? What will the researcher identify in the data? Patterns and beliefs and behaviors. Okay. And why is this important? Well, he tells us right there. They aim to contribute to writing pedagogy. So he's going to inform writing pedagogy, or she's going to inform writing pedagogy. Okay, so it tells us how the study is going to be done, and you're doing the study, so what? Why is it important? This is why it's important. Okay, so again, take a moment, think about your own research. How's the study going to be done? What are you, the researcher, trying to identify in the data? And why is it important? Okay, so we'll go through these, and I've got quite a few examples here. I'm not going to go through every one. You can find this all in the resource that's in my Teachers Pay Teachers store, but we'll work through the first few here together. This study examines how first-generation graduate students navigate academic discourse norms in STEM fields by analyzing writing samples and conducting semi-structured interviews. The research seeks to inform institutional writing support strategies by highlighting language patterns and rhetorical choices common among this population. So, wow, we've got a lot of really I think it's a really great thesis statement here. So we're talking about academic discourse norms. And we're talking about language patterns and rhetorical choices. So what aspects of the topic are going to be explored? Right there. Okay, language patterns and rhetorical choices in academic writing. What methods, population, or framework will be used? Well, he talks about writing samples and semi-structured interviews. What's the population? First generation graduate students. What are the limitations or the boundaries? Well, it's limited to grad students in the STEM field. Okay, we're not talking about other disciplines here. It's got to be in science, technology, engineering. We're focusing on STEM and mathematics. So let's take a look here at this second one. Drawing on classroom observations and teacher interviews, this study investigates how multilingual secondary teachers in urban U.S. schools incorporate translanguaging practices in content area instruction. The goal is to better understand how linguistic flexibility supports equitable access to curriculum. So what aspect of this topic is being studied? Translanguaging. How is translanguaging incorporated into content instruction by multilingual teachers? So right there, I've got my population. The population is multilingual teachers. It's going to include classroom observation and teacher interviews. Those are my methods. And it's also set in urban US schools. So this is restricted to secondary teachers in an urban context. It excludes those who are not multilingual. It excludes monolingual teachers. It excludes rural educators. So again, we can see who's in and who's out in this study. All right, and we've got two more here, but I'm going to let you pause the video and work through these on your own. And we're going to talk about the concept of a working thesis statement. And we talked about this in our last video. We said this is a starting point, right? It's not a finished product because we're going to be reading more and more, and we're going to be narrowing our scope, hopefully. So this is really important that we stay flexible, especially when we're early on in our academic journey. This is a bit of a messy process, and that's okay. It's meant to be, and that helps us to get better. So here we've got an example of a working thesis. This study examines how contemporary novels use natural landscapes to reflect characters' emotional states, drawing from eco-critical theory. I've got a doctoral student right now who is doing an eco-criticism, so this is directed at his research. And I think this is a pretty good thesis statement, a good starting point. Here's something more polished. Focusing on three contemporary American novels. So right there, we've narrowed our scope. This study applies eco-critical theory to analyze how natural landscapes are constructed, not only as environmental settings, but also as emotional mirrors that shape character development and narrative tension. Wow, that's so much better. So the author really does a great job polishing that thesis. So let's take a look here, and we've got a couple of examples here, and I think some of these are actually pretty good. I think they're very good working thesis statements, very good starting points, but we can polish them further. This study investigates how the visibility of on-campus mental health services influence undergraduate students' willingness to seek support. And I would want to know where, perhaps. So it says the visibility of on-campus mental health services. Where is it visible? Is it visible on campus? Is it visible at sporting events on campus? Is it visible at places off campus that students frequent? Is it visible in a digital realm? Is it on the social media page for the university? How does that impact undergraduate students' willingness to seek support? Okay, and I think it's a pretty well-defined population, undergraduate students. I could even go further. I might be looking at more vulnerable populations. I might be looking at first generation generation multilingual female students. Might be really narrowing that scope. The important thing is when we do narrow that scope, we don't want to narrow it so far that we're basically restricting our ability to gather data, right? We want to make sure that we still have the ability to sample that population. And yeah, their willingness to seek support. We could go further, and their willingness is kind of uh, I might even say that actually do seek support, that utilize the cue from these advertisements to go and get emotional support, mental health services. So there's a couple of ways that we could do that. I would also add how they're going to do it. Are they going to do semi-structured interviews? Is it going to be an analysis, a records analysis, which gets a little tricky because you're talking about health information, so you've got privacy concerns there. So, how is that going to be done? Those are all questions that I'm going to need to answer as I seek to polish that thesis statement. Here we've got this study analyzes how gender roles are represented in commercials targeted at children. Maybe this qualitative study, or this qualitative case study analyzes how gender roles are represented in toy commercials targeted at children under 5, or targeted at children under 10, something like that. So we could go further with all of these. So now let's talk about the language for our thesis statement. So our thesis statements can describe, and I talked about this earlier, but generally this is not something on its own that is going to constitute a doctoral dissertation, right? It's going to be combined together with some type of analysis. We're going to want to go further. So this study describes the structure, goals, and perceived effectiveness of formal mentorship models implemented in doctoral programs at 3 U.S. research universities. I think that's a really good thesis statement. It's descriptive. I'd like to know a little bit more. How is it going to describe this? What methods are used? But we want to go further with that. We're going to need to analyze. So we're either going to analyze or we're going to seek to understand a relationship. So here I've got a thesis that says this research analyzes how doctoral students in the humanities and social sciences use digital tools. Specifically, reference managers, writing trackers, and collaborative platforms to manage writing-related anxiety. Drawing on interview data and digital writing logs, the study examines patterns of use and perceived impact on students' writing productivity and emotional regulation. The second one, the study explores the relationship between structured writing group participation and publication output. So here we've got a correlational study. Among early career researchers in STEM fields. Wow, really well-defined population. I love that. Using survey data from 120 researchers and follow-up interviews with 15 participants. So we've got a mixed method study there. The research examines correlation between group frequency, peer accountability, and submission rates to peer-reviewed journals. So, wow, I think that would be a really interesting study. Okay, so in our next lesson, we are going to talk about research questions. So I want you to perhaps pause the video, look at these two thesis statements. I want you to jot down some ideas. What research questions could this author be trying to answer in their study? And we're going to speak to that in our next video. So let's finish up with some skills work on pronoun agreement. So a pronoun has to agree with the antecedent. The antecedent is the noun that the pronoun is replacing. It has to agree in number, gender, and person. So the singular they is acceptable when we're referring to a person that's unknown or a person who is non-binary. Collective nouns like team, committee, and faculty are singular, even though we're talking about multiple people. And indefinite pronouns, everyone, each, somebody, are singular. We can use their with these indefinite pronouns. We can say everyone must submit his or her report. We can also say everyone must submit their report. So I won't go through all of these, but you can pause the video and practice these on your own. Everyone must bring, or I'm sorry, each student must bring his or her own laptop to the workshop or their laptop to the workshop. The committee submitted its report by the deadline. Neither John nor Sarah remembered to bring their notes. The researchers presented their findings at the conference. And one more, someone left his bag, her bag, or their bag in the hallway. Okay, so here I've got those answers. All right, so you can work now on drafting a thesis statement for your own research. Make sure that it's not opinion-based. It should be grounded in the literature, and make sure you've got a clear scope and direction for your research. Thank you so much for joining me for another lesson at the Language Arts Gallery, and I will see you in our next video.